If we can probe the physics of inflation, one of the predictions of that physics is that, in fact, most of space is still expanding very fast. Our universe was like a seed that decoupled from that background space that was expanding, but there should be many other universes, some of which are just being born now. If we can test the physics of inflation, we'll turn this metaphysics into physics, because we'll be able to probe the theory, and even though we won't ever be able to see those other universes, we'll be able to make predictions about our universe based on that theory, and if they predict the 50 things we can measure accurately, then the 51st, which we can't see, which is the existence of other universes, is something that we'll be willing to at least indirectly accept. Just like when Einstein was developing, in fact, his special theory of relativity, we didn't know, no one would ever thought we'd be able to see atoms. But everyone knew atoms existed because of all the indirect evidence.
So the more important thing is that Francis is a good friend of mine.
Sure.
We've become friends the last day or so talking. And so reasonable people can act reasonably. But nevertheless, the question, so there are different levels. Obviously, you won't deny your children education, okay? Because you're not that extreme. But there are people who do, and that's certainly child abuse. But even more so, you point out that you're a Christian because, in large part, because you grew up to be a Christian. I grew up in a Jewish family. It's hard to overcome those things when you're a child. And I think Richard Dawkins gives a very good example that really raised my awareness. It was a beautiful picture in a newspaper at Christmas time of 3 kids in the newspaper. And it's just a heartwarming picture. These 3 little kids, and they're playing together, and it says it's a Muslim kid and a Christian kid and a Jewish kid, and you go, ah. And then you think, what if I said it's a neoliberal kid, a libertarian kid, and a conservative kid? When they're 3 years old, they're none of those things. We label kids by a religion, which is, as you point out, is a complex, deep issue. And we force it upon them to label them, saying you're a Christian child, and you should believe these things before they have any concept of death, life, suffering, all of the things that lead adults to either forsake their faith or keep it. And isn't it unfair to force that upon a little kid?
Could I...
The truths of quantum mechanics are so strange that we will never intuit them, no matter how advanced we become as a civilization, because we are classical objects. We can't ever directly experience the phenomena, or at least rarely experience directly the phenomena that the mathematics of quantum mechanics tells us are true. Well, not only are both those strange, but it turns out general relativity and quantum mechanics are incompatible, mathematically. That when you try and apply the laws of quantum mechanics to the dynamics of space and time, you come up with nonsense, mathematical nonsense. In some sense, for most of our understanding of the universe, understanding quantum gravity is irrelevant. Right. It really is. We can understand almost all of nature without ever understanding quantum gravity. So while it's a fundamental theoretical question, it's not an obstacle to understanding the way much of the universe works, except for one thing that makes it interesting, more interesting, is that the universe is expanding. And what is very large now, at the very beginning, was very small. And if we really want to answer that important question, is how do we get here and why, or what caused the beginning of the universe? Was there something before the beginning? All those fascinating questions. At some point, we're stuck, because if we extrapolate back the universe, we know that the laws of physics hold back to the time our entire observable universe, all the 400 billion galaxies we see, was contained in regions smaller than the size of an atom. Right. But when you get smaller still, even that point we can understand it. But when you get smaller still, and really want to get to the very beginning, then we have to know how quantum mechanics and gravity work together, because gravity is what describes the universe on its largest scales, which at that time will be that big. Quantum mechanics describes on the smallest scales, which at that time will be that big.
So at that point, it's the same scale.
It's the same scale, and we really can never truly answer that fundamental question. This is what a gravitational wave looks like. This is what it does to space. Experimentalists have built another detector to detect gravitational waves. This is the largest detector on Earth to look for gravitational waves. This is in Hanford, Washington. There's another one in Louisiana that looks the same. And it is amazing. In order to detect the kind of gravitational waves they're looking for, they had to design a detector that could measure a change in the length of that tunnel, 4 kilometers long, compared to the length of this tunnel, that was 1/100th the size of a proton. And they could do it. They built a detector to do that, but they still haven't seen any gravitational waves. The real
philosophical and theological question is that it makes it appear as if you need a divinity, that seems to violate the laws of physics, is how can you have all this stuff if there wasn't stuff in the first place? And the thing I wanted to celebrate was that you can get all this stuff from no stuff without any supernatural shenanigans. And that, to me, is amazing. And that's the question I wanted to address. Okay.
But you did not show how you get there from nothingness in the sense that philosophers have always meant the term. And that's why you started out rightly by saying,
I don't care what philosophers always mean the term. I defined what I meant by nothing.
Fine.
I defined my terms. They don't.
You didn't mean what they've always meant.
I don't define in terms of what they mean. I defined what, I wrote a book. Right. Why is there something rather than nothing?
There is a sense of the word nothing as defined by you in which you have shown how something can arise for it. It's just not the sense that philosophers have always meant.
Fine.
Which is fine. Okay, so we agree on that.
Yeah, I don't know what philosophers are. I would claim I've yet to meet a philosopher who's defined what they've always meant.
Well, they definitely...
No, when it comes to nothing, I define at least my terms. No one's ever counted me. You know what they define nothing as? That from which only God can create something.
No,
well,
no,
that's,
philosophers don't.
Not theologians. Now, the point, it amazes me when you say that so the central question of philosophy is a question which is unanswerable. Well, I come from a field where we actually try and ask questions we can answer. That's the difference between physics and philosophy. One makes progress, one doesn't.
Has anybody?
We look out at the sky, the cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang. Right. One of the most important observations in cosmology, and won another Nobel Prize last year, in fact. We've already learned that there may be problems because we've seen some anomalies in that radiation bath, in the way the temperature changes from point to point. Does that point out some new physics? Maybe, maybe not. The reason being that we now think we can understand how all of the galaxies we see in the universe today arose as quantum fluctuations in the early universe, random quantum fluctuations. Well, if they're random, and if they're probabilistic, then every now and then you can have something that seems weird. If I flip a coin, every now and then I'll get 12 heads in a row. Right. Well, if I flip it a lot of times, I won't see that too often. But if I only flip it 12 times and I happen to get 12 heads in a row, I don't know if the coin is fixed or if it's just an accident. And when we look at some of the fluctuations now that are a little weird, we don't know, because we only have access to one universe, if it's fundamentally weird physics or just an accident of the universe in which we live, which is really kind of a fascinating problem.
We have seen people's morality, if you want to call it morality, change. Slavery might have been okay because you might have believed that certain groups were inferior or not human. Science has told us that's wrong. You might have believed, as almost all religions do, that women are chattel. Science has told us that's wrong. You might have believed that homosexuality is evil. But science has told us that all mammalian species have homosexuality. There's nothing unnatural or evil about it. So to have a morality without science is empty. When we look out almost 13.8 billion light years away in all directions, we see radiation coming at us from that surface because at that moment, when it cooled to below 3,000 degrees, matter became neutral, the universe became transparent, and this image called the cosmic microwave background radiation has actually won 2 different Nobel Prizes for the discovery. The discovery of it and this image is really a baby picture of the universe. If you want to see the non-projected version, it's like this with us at the center. We're not at the center of the universe because if we moved over here, we'd see a sphere centered around us over there, and if we were over here, we'd see a sphere centered around us over there.
When you think about it, you're looking out at the center of this. This is a picture taken from Earth, and looking out this way, we see about 13.8 billion years back in time. Looking out this way, we see 13.8 billion years in time. So it's not surprising that that's 13.8 billion years away there, that one's 13.8 billion years away there. So there just hasn't been time in the universe for information to go from point A to point B. But as Lawrence said, if we step a little bit to the side, we see a slightly different sphere. That means that there's stuff outside of this sphere that exists that we can't see. And indeed, with our current understanding, we will never be able to see this because the universe is accelerating and the light from material out here will try to get to us, but the universe expands faster than it can make it through the creation of space. And so we have a real fundamental question. If I can't actually ever see or know this stuff exists, and it seems like it should exist, is it really there?
Well, a famous biologist once said every scientist is an atheist when they go in the laboratory. They don't think anyone is twiddling the knobs. They accept the fact that the evidence of the experiment will tell them what's going on. They don't think that someone's controlling it. So I don't define myself as an atheist. I should first say that. I define myself as an anti-theist. Namely, it would be presumptuous of me to say there's no purpose to the universe because I can't prove that. I can't prove there's no God. I can't say definitively there's no God. And if science tells us that there's no objective meaning to the universe, no purpose or meaning, does that make our lives purposeless and meaningless? Absolutely not. Quite the contrary. It means the purpose and meaning in our lives is what we make. It makes what we do more important. It makes the compassion we show others more important. We're not being told what to do by some cosmic Saddam Hussein, who, by the way, in many religions doesn't just condemn you to torture for while you're alive, but for all eternity. You do it because we derive meaning and, in fact, the recognition, not from religion that all humans have equal dignity, but from science, that we're all a common species. In fact, that there's nothing sacred, that we create compassion and action, and in fact, that humans are no different than other animals in the sense of being evolved species. And we have to realize that we share the earth with them, and in fact, those ideas allow us to address what are the real problems of the 21st century. And if we keep going back to this medieval or earlier kind of myths, we won't address that. In fact, I sort of take umbrage at this sister's remarks because I don't think anything she said had anything to do with religion. She said understanding dignity, treating people with compassion, and then what people of religion do is they usurp that. They say, if you're not religious, you can't have any of that. But all of those ideas come from a rational view of who we are and how we should relate to others. The best example of tolerance and across cultures that I can think of is nearby here in Geneva at the Large Hadron Collider. There is a machine that's built by people from 100 different countries speaking a dozen different languages with many different religions and cultures, building these devices that have to work to a millionth of a meter. And it works because science brings people together. Science tells us that we are a common species and we can work together to make the world a better place. And I will close with a quote. I won't sing it, you'll be pleased to know. From Jacob Bronowski, who said, the world is permeated through and through by science. And you can't turn it into a game merely by picking sides. Like it or not, the world is governed by science, the physical world. And if we want to deal with our real problems, we have to accept what nature is telling us instead of imposing our beliefs on nature.
Yeah, we agree, because I think the worst gratuitously insulting people is to tell people that you're absolutely right because your God is right and theirs wrong. So I think you're absolutely right. No, you're not saying it.
I'm not asking for that.
No, but I think you're absolutely right. The best way we'll come to be moral is by getting rid of all organized religions, which would claim that they have a monopoly on truth. And then we'll have a much better world. Absolutely.